In this session, we'll cover UI5 concepts. So here we will be discussing SAP UI5 components and the overview. Then we'll discuss the MVC, then the UI controls, UI5 libraries, and HTML5 overview. So first of all, SAP key UI, these are the SAP key UI tools and the technologies. So we can use the UI development toolkit for HTML5, that is my SAP UI5, to create the apps with rich user interfaces for modern web business applications. So the apps developed with the SAP UI5 present one consistent user interface. So they are responsive across the browsers and the devices, and they run on the smartphones, tablets, and the desktops. The UI controls automatically adapt themselves to the capabilities of each device. So SAP UI5 offers powerful development concepts like the built-in extensibility concepts at code and the application level, then the data binding types and the model view controller. Then it is feature rich. It has the feature rich UI controls for handling the complex UI patterns and predefined layouts for the typical use cases. Then it is full translation support. Then the keyboard interaction support and the accessibility features. So these are the certain powerful features which the SAP UI5 has. So the SAP Fiori applications, they are built with the SAP UI5. So SAP Fiori apps, they follow the SAP Fiori design principles to ensure the consistent design and a high level of design quality. So here is the overview of the key UI technologies, that is my SAP UI5 and the UI5 application development tools to change, adapt or develop the new applications. Then the WebDem Pro app and the Floor Plan Manager. This is the tool that can be used for the adoption or creating the new apps. After that, we have the SAP Dem Pro, which includes the SAP screen personas to optimize the SAP GUI screens. Also the connections to the backend. So the Dem Pro screens have a close relationship to the backend. They are very interwoven. So the screen personas, for example, is only a layer on the Dem Pro where we can reduce the fields, merge the tops, combine the fields, but we cannot add the business functionality. This only works on the UI level. So the SAP UI5 with the gateway, there is a clear separation between the UI and the business logic. After that, the setup enables us to be more flexible in the future, and the gateway does not need to run on the same machine as the backend. So here we can see that the gateway, it can be different from the backend machine. After that, we can see the theme designer, which is running up the right side of the screen, that allows for the branding of the UIs. After that, the basic fundamental architectural change is that we decouple the UI and the business logic and are very flexible in reacting to the changes in the UI technology. It was more difficult in the past. This keeps evolving, and in the coming years this will be continue to improve the new UI technologies. So in this we can see that here we have the UI clients. So in my UI clients, we can have the SAP GUI, SAP NetWeaver portal, SAP NetWeaver business client. Then we have the UI tools. So the UI tools, they are like SAP UI5 application development tools, then the flexible UI designer, then the screen personas. Then there are the different UI technologies which are SAP UI5, then the WebDem Pro, BAP, Flow Plan Manager. So that we have seen what is the feature of each one of these. Now we have why the user experience. So why we are focusing this much on the user experience? Because having a great user experience has an impact on the business value. So many people, they believe that the user experience is simply colors and fonts. However, we have learned throughout this that it is simply not the true. If a great user experience is achieved, the people gain the productivity and can work faster and more efficiently. So increase adoption, decrease errors, and save the training costs as well. So all very positive outcomes that immediately impact the overall business value. So it is not like that the user experience is only confined to the colors and the fonts. Rather, there is much more to it which will actually impact our business value. So the SAP had several escalations at the customers about the user experience of their products. So they went out and observed like how people worked with our products. So they took the designers, researchers, user experience professionals and observed like how they work. So they saw some of the issues which could be resolved with the existing SAP tools, but the IT departments weren't aware of it. So they also saw that IT needs to be better understand their end users, and they realized that the end users, they perceive the custom built screens as SAP screens, which was very interesting to them. So the result was recognizing that they lacked the design skills, and SAP UI5 and other tools, they helps them to enforce a design standard that will help their customers to better reach the design goals. So in this we can see that the user experience, it will have the direct impact on the business value, and when we enhance the user experience, it will help to gain productivity, to increase the user adoption, to decrease the user errors, and to save the training cost. After that, we have SAP UI5. So what is SAP UI5? SAP UI5 is a client UI technology which is based on the JavaScript, CSS and HTML5. SAP UI5 applications, they run in a browser. So depending on the device the application is to run on, whether it is a mobile, tablet or the desktop, so we use the different UI libraries. So the servers come into play for deploying our applications, storing the SAP UI5 libraries and connecting to a database. So depending on the environment in which SAP UI5 is used, the libraries or the applications are stored on an SAP NetWeaver application server or an SAP HANA cloud platform. So the preferred way to access the business data for our application is using the OData model through a SAP gateway. So when users, they access an SAP UI5 application from their device, a request is sent to the respective server to load the application into the browser. So the view accesses the relevant libraries. Usually the model is also instantiated and the business data is fetched from the database. So for this, like in SAP UI5, we have the SAP, so it is called as the SAP UI Development Toolkit for HTML5. So this is the official long name for SAP UI5, and SAP UI5, it is the short name for SAP UI5. After that, these are the few characteristics of SAP UI5. So it is an extensible JavaScript based HTML5 browser rendering library for the business applications. So it has a well-designed API which is easy to consume and use. Then it has an extensible UI component model including the tooling support. Then high performance and the SAP product standard compliant. Then it has a powerful theming support based on the CSS. It provides the Ajax capabilities and is based on the open standards like OpenAjax, JavaScript, CSS, HTML5. Then it is also using and including the popular jQuery library. After that, we have the UI5 key components. So on the client side, the UI5 key components are the control libraries, which include the JavaScript, CSS and the image files. After that, we have the core, which is the JavaScript files. Then the test suite, which is HTML or the JavaScript files again. Then on the server side, it is optional, but on the server side we have the application development tools in Eclipse, control development tools in Eclipse, after that the resource handler in Java and ABAP, and then the theming generator. So these are the key components of UI5. After that, this is a UI5 browser support. So it supports the Internet Explorer version 8 and upwards. Then it supports the Firefox version 10 and upwards, and the version 10 ESR and upwards. For Chrome, it supports the version 1 and upwards, and for Safari, it supports version 3 and upwards. So Internet Explorer 8 is supported with the graceful degradation for CSS3 features like the rounded corners, text shadows, etc. After that, in this slide we have this is the high level architecture overview of my UI5. So in this we can see that we have divided it into two parts, that is my application client and the application server. So in my application server we have the NetWeaver as ABAP, then the NetWeaver as Java, then the NetWeaver Cloud, and the SAP HANA Extended Application Service, which is my access engine. And we also have the gateway, SAP backend, and the DB. Then in the application client, which is a browser, so this browser, it can be accessed from a mobile, a tablet, or the desktop. Then in this we have the UI5 runtime and the libraries, then the views with the sap.mlib, then the controllers and the views with SAP UI Commons, then the models which are based on the JSON, XML, or OData. So this is the high level architecture overview of my SAP UI5. After that, this is the SAP UI5 architecture overview again. In this it is a more clear picture. So first of all we have the web server. So in the web server we have the resource handler. After that, in the SAP UI5 core, so in the core we have the data binding, the control base, then the render manager, and all these they comes under the UI, which is a jQuery.ui. After that we have the event, resources, device, utils, and the logger into my SAP jQuery plugins. Then the jQuery. After that, in my SAP UI5 libraries we have the themes and the controls, which are for the mobile as well as the desktop. So these are the optional server component, then the core JavaScript framework including the jQuery, then the extension libraries which have the controls and the themes. After that we have the assets like less and the code minimizer. Then the UI5 and the extensibility. So the UI5 allows the application developers to include their own JavaScript, HTML, and CSS into the UI5 based pages. It includes the other JavaScript libraries where the UI5 is lacking the controls or functionality. Then it helps them to create the composite controls from the existing UI5 controls. Then it helps them to write the new UI libraries and the new controls, and also to write the plugins for the UI5 core. So this way the UI5 development groups should not become a bottleneck for the application groups in need of a certain functionality. Then how we can get the UI5 running? So the UI5 mainly consists of the JavaScript, CSS, and the image files that run in a browser. So apart from this main offering, the runtime file, the UI5 has many more optional pieces of software like the runtime documentation, Eclipse development tools, and the sample apps. So in order to get the UI5 running on a web page, the UI5 resources need to be loaded by the browser. So these options, they are available for referencing the UI5 runtime files, which are my runtime libraries and the SDK. After that we have the MVC. So my MVC, it is a model view controller concept, and it is used in SAP UI5 to separate the representation of the information from the user interaction. So this separation facilitates the development and the changing of the parts independently. Then the model view and the controller, they are assigned the following roles, like the view is responsible for defining and rendering the UI. Then the model manages the application data. The controller, they reacts to the view events and the user interaction by modifying the view and the model. So here we can see that we have the controller, we have the view, and we have the model. So here the controller and view, it updates my controller, and the model, it also depends on the update operation. Then we have the data binding between the view and the model. So the purpose of data binding in the UI is to separate the definition of the user interface, that is view, the data visualized by the application, that is model, and the code for the business logic for processing the data, that is controller. So the separation has the advantages, like it provides the better readability, maintainability, and the extensibility, and it will allows us to change the view without touching the underlying business logic and to define the several views of the same data. So the views and the controllers often form a one-on-one relationship, but it is also possible to have the controllers without a UI. So these controllers are called the application controllers. It is also possible to create the views without the controllers. So from the technical position, a view is a SAP UI5 control and can have or inherit a SAP UI5 model. So the view and the controller represent the reusable units, and distributed development is highly supported by them. Now here let's see what are the different type of models we have in the SAP UI5. So a model in the model view controller concept holds the data and provides the methods to retrieve the data from the database and to set and update data. So SAP UI5, it provides the predefined models, which are the JSON model, XML model, resource model, and the OData model. So the JSON model, it can be used to bind the controls to the JavaScript object data, which is usually serialized in the JSON format. The JSON model is a client-side model, and therefore it is intended for the small datasets which are completely available on the client. The JSON model, it supports the two-way binding. Then we have the XML model. So XML model is a client-side model intended for the small datasets which are completely available on the client. The XML model does not contain the mechanisms for the server-based paging or loading of the deltas. Then the resource model, it is designed to handle the data in the resource bundles, mainly to provide the text in different languages. Then the OData model, it enables the binding of the controls to the data from OData services. The OData model is a server-side model. The dataset is only available on the server, and the client only knows the currently visible rows and the fields. This also means that the sorting and the filtering on the client is not possible. So for this, the client has to send a request to the server. Then the OData model currently supports the OData version 2.0. The JSON model, XML model, and the resource model, they are the client-side models, meaning that the model data is loaded completely and is available on the client. So the operations such as the sorting and the filtering, they are executed on the client without the further server request. The OData model, however, it is a server-side model and only loads the data requested by the user interface from the server. And any changes in the data binding or the list operations, they require a new request to the server. So a web application should support the several data sources such as the JSON, XML, Atom, or the OData. However, the way in which the data binding is defined and implemented within the UI control should be independent of the respective data source. So it is also possible to create a custom model implementation for the data sources that are not yet covered by the framework or are domain specific.